this hour, we're gonna have a guest. This is a tease ahead. We're gonna have a guest, Jason Rance, who comes on the show very often. He's one of my best buddies. He has a wonderful show over there on 770 KTTH, and he's gonna join us at 1:30 to talk about Seattle Mayor Bruce Harrell's plan for housing in Seattle, which, as we all know, is getting tight. Seattle's a tough market. It's expensive. I saw a story the other day that the median home price of a house in Seattle is over $800,000 now.
Yeah, that's right.
And that's just the median price that somebody can expect to pay. That's very unaffordable for a lot of folks.
Now, median means half the houses fall below that, half the houses fall above that, right? Is that it's not the average price? That's the median.
Median price, yeah.
Right,
so I would say that qualifies as average, right?
Yeah, there's a distinction between the two. I'll figure out what it is and convey it.
It's the median price.
It's what it costs to live here.
Somebody can let us know.
The average Joe.
I've seen. Obviously, that doesn't mean it's going to be a super livable great house for $800,000. You could get a lot of house for a lot. I mean, you can get a lot less house than you would think for $800,000.
Yeah, that's true. And it's funny what qualifies for a house these days. You know, when a house gets torn down and 14 houses go on the same lot.
Well, that's the thing that Harrell's. So he's having this proposal right now, and he's going to be up for re-election, and so he's wanting to put these things out there. He's saying he wants to add. Look at this. Is this number correct? I think I read this incorrectly the first time. Just subconsciously, I read it way wrong. Calling for over 330,000 new housing units within 20 years. Is that really what his proposal is?
That's what his idea is. That's what's
so crazy.
He says that's what it's going to take. If you have a city that wants to grow economically, right? If you want to be a booming economy, an attractive market to get people to move into, to build a tax base, it's going to take that many housing additions in 20 years.
330,000? Is that what he's suggesting?
Yeah, that's what he's suggesting. And we're talking about the mayor of Seattle. Not
this is how dumb that sounds.
Not the King County executive or the governor of Washington.
It's the mayor of Seattle. Listen to how crazy that sounds. I have now read this story 3 different times just to make sure we have all the details. And every single time I read it, my brain fixed what I thought was a typo, and it said 33,000 units.
Yeah.
And I thought, that doesn't seem so crazy. Seattle has achieved more than that in a less amount of time.
Right.
I actually went and even looked it up, and I was like, I don't understand what's the
outrage? What's the jaw-dropping outrage?
Look at the Seattle City Council put out this thing. Between 2010 and 2020, Seattle added 60,000 new units in a decade. And I thought, okay, most of those were in the Central District, which means they were built up.
Okay, exactly right.
A lot of those, one on top of the other. You're seeing a lot of apartment housing, things like that. So I was like, but 60,000 in 10 years, I was like, that can be done. So he's only proposing 33,000 in 20 years? And now I'm rereading it live on the air. 330,000? That's what he's proposing?
Yeah, about twice, and it's about twice the growth rate if you look at it that way.
That's not achievable. That's not achievable. You can't do that.
Well, it's achievable, but
how many did they build last year? 12,000.
Okay.
So let's say, and last year is being billed as a banner year where they were like, oh, we had all these permits, all these people are like, finally, we're letting up after the pandemic, and people are finally in the point where they can start building again. What is this number here? 12,300 and something. What is this? 12,853 new units completed in Seattle last year. A 20-year high. 12,853. You would have to more than double that.
Double that for 20 years.
For 20 years.
I hear you.
Is that realistic, or is that just pie in the sky?
Well, it is realistic, but here's the thing. It's not going to be without a massive sacrifice and a complete change of what Seattle is.
What would that mean, though? What does that mean? Tell me what you're explaining there.
Well, so it will be a explosion of exactly what my family lived through when the neighborhood, our first home on the west slope of Queen Anne. We lived in a big old house, 2,700 square feet.
That's great.
Built in 1906,
Perfect.
I believe this house was. Right, and when we lived in this home, Melissa and I bought this house, wanted to raise our family in this house. At the time, the mayor, I believe, was Nichols, deemed that stretch of the west slope of Queen Anne to be high-density multifamily. The mayor at that point realized you need more places to live. You need a greater tax base. So my neighborhood became this, from single houses to everybody was building an accessory dwelling unit. Everybody was building a mother-in-law apartment or an apartment building they were developing their backyards.
As rentals.
As rentals.
Yeah.
So, that's what we experienced, and it literally drove us out of the city. That's why we moved off Queen Anne.
You left.
We left for Shoreline.
And you said we need to be somewhere where they still prioritize having your own
single family home.
Plot of land.
And I don't see how Seattle has anything left of neighborhoods that are single family homes. if you're going to stick 330,000 housing units in the city in 20 years.
That number blows my mind.
It's doable, but it's stuff and stack housing in from one Seattle border to the next.
But it's, I mean,
little neighborhoods, single family home neighborhoods.
Oh,
You've seen what happens. Every time a house gets sold, they scrape the lot and put up 5, 6, 14 houses.
That's exactly what happened.
Right?
My wife and I lived in Green Lake for like, I don't know, 5, 7 years or something before we were going to buy a house. We weren't going to be able to afford Seattle house. Not what we needed for our family. Just like you guys, when you found your home in Queen Anne,
yes.
We needed some space. We needed a yard.
Right.
We needed a place where our kids could stretch out and run around.
Pets and play.
Yeah,
and a jungle gym in the backyard.
I don't want my kids looking up over the fence and seeing surrounded on all sides by townhouses.
Right, other neighbors.
Just people staring down into your tiny little plot,
That's
big enough
exactly
to grow a
why
pea
we
patch.
moved. Right, they built a 3-story apartment building behind my house on Queen Anne.
If you even have a backyard. Yeah,
right.
Exactly. So we moved out of town for that reason, but I remember before we moved out, the neighbor down the street, which is in Green Lake, they probably had, when the house was built, turn of the century, just kind of like your house you're describing Queen Anne. I bet you they had a view of Green Lake itself. I bet you they had a view of the lake.
Yeah, at some point.
At some point, and then it filled in and they no longer did.
Yeah.
But it was this really cool old, we called it the farmhouse. I don't know what they called it, but it looked like an old farmhouse.
Yeah.
It was red. It was clearly from a whole different time.
Sure.
Had a pretty good-sized plot of land, especially for downtown. And they sold. And as they sold, we said, all right, watch how fast the developers swoop in and just make that into many, many homes. So what they did was they knocked the house down, this cool old historic house. I'm not against progress either. Like, I'm not against, if you want to sell your land to a developer and make 100 times what it's worth as just a normal little house, whatever. I get it. That's money in that person's pocket. It's tough to turn down money.
Yeah.
But they sell the house, they leave, and then the developer comes in, and they did. They built 14 units, one on top of another, in this row. And they're nice little things, but they're like 8 feet wide each.
Yep.
And
they share walls between other buildings.
Oh, they all share walls.
Yeah,
they have like a common courtyard that you walk in. Yeah. Street parking is just wherever you can find a spot. It was just, I couldn't live like that.
I see them everywhere, every neighborhood now. Yeah.
So where you used to have one house, and parking for 2 people, 2 cars, you now have 14 and no parking. So if that's what he's talking about doing, I guess that's achievable. But is that a city that anybody wants to live in?
That's my point. There's a sacrifice to be made, and that sacrifice is Seattle as we know it.
I guess it just depends on where you're at what stage of your life. You're going to have a lot of people who are Laura's age who are interested. She probably wouldn't mind. I don't want to speak for you, Laura, but like,
no,
you're probably
please.
not spending a ton of time mowing your backyard. That's probably not of a huge interest to you right now.
No.
You would rather like be it easy. I could walk in and out of my place. Parking, I imagine, would be something you'd want, though.
Yeah, I care about parking. But I live in a walkable area and I have a bike.
Yeah.
And the
So
light
you don't
rail's
care about
expanding.
space.
So
this would be perfect for you. Like one of these like, 3-story units where you could just live your life. You're not outside a ton. And if you want to be outside, you go to a park.
I mean, it would be if they didn't cost $1 million.
That's the
I think
other
that's
problem.
the thing that I run into when I think about buying something instead of just renting is
So
that
expensive.
it's just a huge jump to be able to purchase something that's not like a studio apartment.
Yeah, because then you got to put down like $1 million house. You're going to put down 180 grand, 200 grand,
right.
so you don't have to pay the insurance. It's crazy. I mean,
And here's the thing too. I mean, there's going to be expansion and growth and development and evolution of a city, but everything is always at the expense of somebody. Like when we were on Queen Anne, we had a view of the Sound and the Olympic Mountain Range. Right, it was wonderful. Mm-hmm. It wasn't just we had a yard; we had value of a view. So when the city changed the code and allowed my neighbors to build an apartment building in their backyard, and the house across the street from us, between myself and the view, did the same thing. My view got blocked by a 3-story apartment building.
Jerks.
So my property value went down. I used to have a view home. Now I don't anymore. And when I complained to the city, we went to all those zoning meetings.
This is in Queen Anne?
This was in Queen Anne. And
Yep.
this was 20 years ago. And it's gotten nothing but worse for people, right? There are height restrictions on how tall you can build so you don't steal your neighbor's view and diminish his property value. Well, we aired our concerns. We went to council, went to meetings, went to hearings. And they did what they wanted to do for the city anyway. They waived development limitations for all these different, and they said to me, you can develop your backyard too. Like, I don't want to be a property landlord. I don't want to build a rental unit. I want to raise my kids with a yard and a view. That's why we moved here, and that's why we moved out. because the city didn't want to let us keep those at the expense of the growth of the city. And I get what the mayor's saying. You know, you want to be a thriving economy, you want to be a thriving city with a tax base that can afford to provide the services that a city needs to survive and thrive. You got to make concessions somewhere. And it's the rights of individual homeowners and the quaint, nostalgic notion of Seattle being a single-family home kind of town.
It's just going to get more and more expensive.
It's going to get more expensive, more crowded.
Well, that's the thing. I feel like I could compromise on it if it wasn't so expensive to buy what they're building on these lots. I mean, they knocked down a single-family home that was next to my old apartment building, which was also like a converted old home.
Yeah.
Excuse me, I'm still getting over a cold. They built, I think, 5 townhouses that were all kind of connected, like some of them shared walls. And we toured them. They were going for $750,000 to $1.1 million.
Yeah.
It's
what? Crazy.
Like,
$1.1 million for a home that you can hear your neighbors walk to the bathroom at 3 a.m.
Yeah.
Yeah, they should be building something next to me that I could buy and stop renting.
Yeah.
And that also maybe doesn't share walls. I don't know.
No,
good
you're
luck.
right. Well,
Good luck.
it's at that point it's all about location, because that what you want is available. But like Jay said, you can't do it in the city. You got to move out to a suburban area, which has become a city into itself.
It's going to be just a young person's town. But the tough thing is, like, young people can't afford these places, but young people would want to live in these places. Nobody with a family wants to live in a shared wall experience if you don't have to. I've lived in plenty of shared wall places with a family.
Yeah.
And as soon as we could afford to buy a house, we got out of it as quickly as possible because you don't want to be underneath somebody with your kids screaming. You feel bad. They feel bad. Nobody's happy. But that's just what they're building in Seattle. If he's talking about building 330,000 new units, the problem is it's not all going to be in areas where it's like very beautiful. It's going to be in neighborhoods that are already very crowded.
Right.
They're already very expensive, probably. They're going to get more expensive.
And they're going to be rentals because, like Laura said, who can afford to buy these things?
Yeah.
Well, here's the thing. I think tech workers can afford to buy these things. There obviously is a market for them, but I do think it prices out the average person.
I bet you tech workers can afford to rent them. I know they could probably afford to buy them, but I'm thinking they're renting a lot too, because you will look at some of these tech workers that come in. I have friends who work at Amazon, and then they go and they work at Microsoft, or then they go and they take those skills to somewhere else, and like that's how they keep changing jobs.
Yeah, exactly. These guys are hopscotching jobs and residencies.
So, like, are they coming in to make a long-term flag plant here, or are they just putting in their 2 years at Amazon so that they can say it's on their resume and then jump to another job somewhere else? And they're just coming into the community.
You make a great point. It'd be great if we could win them over with cute housing in an urban area.
Yeah.
Where they were like, well, I could picture myself staying here for, 10, 15 years, raising a family.
330,000 new houses is crazy.